doctor approaches the rabbi and he says, you know, Rabbi, I don't mean to brag, but when I have a poor patient, I treat them for free. The rabbi says, I do that. The doctor goes, well, when I have to subscribe any kind of medicine, I make sure I find a generic brand so they don't have to pay anything. The rabbi goes, yeah, I do that. The doctor's getting frustrated. He says, when I do surgery, I make sure that the hospital doesn't charge them over the insurance, so they get surgery for nothing. Rabbi goes, yeah, I do that. The doctor says, listen, Rabbi, all respect, you don't have patients, you don't prescribe medicine, and you certainly don't do surgery. And the rabbi goes, no, I say nice things about myself too. I'm starting with that because in order to talk about Rabbi Sachs, I'm going to talk about Rabbi Sachs and me. And it seems like I'm doing this to say nice things about myself, and I may not entirely escape the charge, but I hope that I will justify it by the content. To some extent, I stand in a different relation to Rabbi Sachs than most, maybe anyone here. First of all, I don't claim to know him nearly as well as many of you do, but I was sort of His Majesty's loyal opposition. Because my first encounter with Rabbi Sachs was after I had written a very long article in the Jewish Review of Books of 10 or 12 of these books that was overall very positive, but had some very pointed criticisms in it. They have been aired here, such as that he was pluralistic to other religions, but not pluralistic in his own religion, which seemed to be an intellectual contradiction, one or two other things. And so it astonished me that I received, after the article came out, an invitation, should I be in London, to come have lunch at the Chief Rabbi's residence. So I did. Now, being a rabbi is in part being a politician. When I walked into the Chief Rabbi's residence, there were a couple of my books on the table. I do not imagine Rabbi Sachs spent most of his time reading my books or having them on the table, but they were there. It reminded me of the first time I published a book. I walked into my editor's office and she had my book. And I said, is it always there? She goes, oh no, we rotate them for every author that walks through the office. And we sat down and had a lunch and discussed all the criticisms in the article. And while I was not persuaded by his answers, we still disagreed. I was overwhelmed by his lack of defensiveness, by his ease, by his character, and also by the fact that at the end of the lunch he gave me his book on science and religion and said, I know you're going to see Prime Minister Blair, please bring him my book. And I thought, I had never been to Shaliach Mitzvah like this. I'm bringing a book from the Chief Rabbi to the former Prime Minister. I'm good to go. What is important about this, at least to me, is that while we're talking about Rabbi Sachs's thoughts, especially for religious figures, are wrapped up in a person. And you can invalidate your deepest theological conceptions if you act like a jerk. And how many times have rabbis heard someone say, you know, the reason I left the shul or I left Judaism is because I asked my rabbi a question and he treated me badly. And I thought, what do I need this for? And so I was very touched, and so much more so, when one of the next times that I saw Rabbi Sachs was at the TED conference. Now, I'd gone to the TED conference for many years, and I was the only kippah in sight. And while there were a number of Jews there weren't a lot of Jews there, and there were a lot of people who weren't Jewish who were hostile to Judaism, and they invited Rabbi Sachs to speak. I don't know if you've watched his TED Talk, but I can tell you what it was like in the room. Everyone who was Jewish felt, as I did, enormously grateful and enormously proud that this was the man representing our tradition. Look, you know, Kinat Sofrim Marbech Hofma? Well, Kinat Rabbanim Marbech Halukah, right? When rabbis are jealous of each other, but you couldn't feel that. Instead, what you felt was not just the message, not just the charisma of the delivery, but the felt integrity of the presence made you want to stand up and say, yeah, that's our guy. This is our guy. And so much of what has gone on at this conference has been an exploration of Rabbi Sachs's eloquence and learning and style and articulation. And yet, of course, as the poet says, I and mine convinced by presence. And that was the most powerful thing. I was on a panel once with Rabbi Sachs in some very unfortunate circumstances. A synagogue had a lot of trouble. We were on a panel together. And I did not, in my own mind, and this will not surprise any of you who are Orthodox, as I am a conservative rabbi, I did not buy for a second his rationalizations about why women have the position that they have in the Orthodox tradition. But even that fundamental disagreement did not in any way diminish for me or for those few people who I think agreed with me the sense that this is the person we want to defend the traditional canons of Judaism to the world. I promised this would be short. So let me conclude by saying this. One of the great characteristics for those of us, especially outside or on the periphery of the Jewish world, one of the things that is most powerful for those of us on the periphery of the Jewish world, thank you, is that Rabbi Sachs had at his fingertips so much literature, history, philosophy, such that you could never accuse his views of being the product of a narrow culture. And so I want to borrow one of those gems that come from his writings to describe him. It's from the poet Kenneth Minogue. He said, you steer by a star, you navigate by a star, but you don't expect to arrive there. And Rabbi Sachs used that to explain the Jewish conception of the Messiah. That is, it's not actually about the Messiah coming, it's about the world reorienting itself such that we would deserve the Messiah to come. So in the past 2 days, what we have done is the same thing. We have steered by Rabbi Sachs. Not because we expect to match his eloquence, to duplicate his learning, or to have his presence. But because both in the diaspora and in Eretz Yisrael, if rabbis would steer by that model, we'd be a lot closer to the Messiah.